I'm Olivia Bennett, and by 30, I had everything I thought would finally make me visible: degrees, accolades, a corner office at one of Boston's top firms. But in every family photo, I was still the one nearly cropped out. My sister, Melissa, was always the star, even when she failed, especially when she failed. Then one day, I discovered her boyfriend had been working on my team, without telling me who he really was. That discovery cracked open a decade of betrayal I never saw coming: professional theft, lies, and a family that quietly erased me over and over again. What I did next changed everything. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever been made to feel like an afterthought in your own story. You're not alone, and this might be the story you've been waiting to hear. There's a photo on my mother's mantle that says everything you need to know about how I grew up. It's from Melissa's high school graduation. She's in the center, beaming, flanked by mom and dad, all dressed in shades of pastel, like they're a Ralph Lauren ad. Off to the side, nearly cropped out entirely, is me. I was 22. I'd just graduated summa cum laude from Brown a week before. But in that frame, I'm just an afterthought, a shadow. And that's how it always was. I used to think maybe I was imagining it, this constant, subtle exclusion. The way my parents' voices lifted when they said Melissa's name. The way my mother touched her wrist when she laughed. People say favoritism is loud and obvious, but in our house, it whispered through side eyes and silences. It was the way my achievements were always followed by a but. Olivia got the internship with the state architect's office, but she really needs to be more social. Or, she's doing well, but she's always so serious. Melissa didn't need accomplishments. She had charm. The kind of effortless, golden girl magnetism that made teachers bend rules and boys trip over themselves to carry her books. While I buried myself in books, she danced in the living room while I practiced speeches for debate. She twirled in front of the mirror in dresses she never had to earn. My mother called her sunshine. I was just focused. Dad once said to me, "Melissa lights up a room, you organize it." I was 14. He thought it was a compliment. It wasn't. We grew up in a modest 2-story home in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston. Tree-lined streets, hydrangeas in every yard, front porches that smelled like sunscreen, and wine coolers in summer. Mom was a middle school art teacher turned part-time event planner after Melissa was born. Dad worked his way up in insurance, proud of his gray suits, and even prouder of the daughter who looked best beside him at company galas. Spoiler alert, it wasn't me. I didn't fight it. Not then. I thought if I just tried harder, one more award, one more scholarship, they'd notice. But no matter what I did, Melissa's C- average was met with balloons and a cake, while my dean's list was quietly acknowledged and then brushed aside. One Christmas, I gave my mother a hand-bound book of sketches from my architecture class. She flipped through it absent-mindedly, then squealed when Melissa gave her a charm bracelet from a mall kiosk. I don't even think she noticed the sketches were of our old neighborhood, her old garden. I was 17 the first time I realized I couldn't win. Melissa had borrowed my laptop without asking. When I got it back, my college application drafts were missing. She'd accidentally deleted them. My mother's response? She didn't mean it. Don't overreact. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain myself. You can scream into a hurricane, but it won't hear you. After high school, I moved out and never really looked back. Boston University was close enough to feel safe, but far enough that I could disappear if I wanted to. I built a life based on excellence. No one could argue with grades, with degrees, with promotions. I stacked them like armor. And still, somehow, Melissa always managed to be the headline, even when she stumbled. Especially when she stumbled. She dropped out of a fashion merchandising program after 2 semesters, and my parents threw her a pivot party. I kid you not, a party to celebrate her courage to change direction. Meanwhile, when I landed my first major campaign at Meridian, I got a text from Dad. "Nice job, don't burn out." The thing is, I wasn't bitter then. Not really. I had therapy. I had friends. I had learned to manage expectations. Love in my family was a resource, one I never really had access to. So I stopped applying for it. I focused on building something they couldn't take away: a career, a reputation, a self. Still, there were cracks. Little ones. Moments that bruised deeper than I'd like to admit. Like when I invited them to a talk I was giving at a women in leadership event downtown, and they never showed. "Oh, honey," Mom had said later. "We thought that was more of a work thing, not really a family event." Melissa, on the other hand, once hosted an Instagram Live body positivity brunch, and they showed up with champagne and monogrammed napkins. By the time I turned 30, I'd settled into the background role I'd never auditioned for. Holiday visits were rare, short, and carefully choreographed. I gave neutral gifts. I accepted passive-aggressive remarks with polite smiles. I didn't argue anymore. I made peace with the idea that, in their eyes, I'd never be the daughter you frame in the center of the photo. What I didn't realize back then was that sometimes, being in the background gives you the best view. You start to see the things no one else is paying attention to. The quiet shifts, the inconsistencies, the cracks in the narrative. And when the spotlight finally moves, even for a second, you're the only one who's been watching closely enough to know where the truth really lives. That moment would come. I just didn't know it yet. Some people come back to their hometowns to reconnect. I came back because Boston never really let me go. The city was in my bones. Its brick alleys, its sharp seasons, the way the air could taste like salt and ambition at the same time. But I didn't return for nostalgia. I returned for a contract. Meridian Enterprises had just secured a multi-million-dollar redevelopment deal with the city, revitalizing an entire stretch of South End where the infrastructure was crumbling. But the real estate potential was golden. I was leading the marketing strategy. My name was on the internal memos. My ideas were front and center. It was my biggest campaign to date. And it just happened to land me back in the zip code I'd spent most of my adult life avoiding. I hadn't seen my family in nearly 8 months when the invitation arrived. Cream envelope, gold embossing, my name written in my mother's delicate script. Like she hadn't ignored my last 3 texts. "You are cordially invited to Diana Bennett's 55th birthday celebration. Dinner at the Charleston, black tie, family only." I'd be lying if I said I didn't pause. Something about that invite, it felt intentional, like bait. But against my better judgment, I RSVP'd yes. I marked it on my calendar in bold. I even bought a new dress, navy silk, asymmetrical neckline, just sharp enough to say I didn't come to blend in. I found a vintage brooch at a boutique on Charles Street, silver filigree, 1960s, the kind of piece my mother used to admire on her own mother. It cost more than I usually spent on sentiment. But that night, I was willing to pay for dignity. 3 days before the dinner, my phone rang. Dad. That alone should have tipped me off. He rarely called unless someone had died or needed a ride to the airport. "Olivia," he said, "there's been a change of plans." My stomach didn't drop. It clenched, slowly, like it already knew what was coming. "What kind of change?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Well, your mother and I think maybe it's better if you don't come Saturday." There it was, precise, casual, cruel. "Excuse me?" "It's just, Melissa mentioned you two had words recently, and your mother's been anxious about the dinner. We want it to be a peaceful night." I stood in the middle of my apartment, staring out the window at the skyline I'd helped light with billboards, trying not to let him hear my breath shift. "What words, Dad? I haven't seen Melissa in weeks." "I don't know the details," he said quickly, "but something clearly happened. She's been upset. And honestly, Liv, every time you're around, things get tense." Tense. That word again. Like I was a misfiring wire no one wanted to rewire. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked, quieter now. "You're uninviting me to Mom's birthday based on a conversation that never happened." "It's not personal." Of course it was personal. "I'll take Mom to lunch next week," he added. Like a consolation prize. Just the 2 of us. And then he hung up. No explanation, no apology, just silence. I stood there for several minutes, phone still in hand, like if I held it long enough, he'd call back and say it was a mistake. But the truth settled fast. I had been edited out, again. Neatly, efficiently, and without warning. For a second, I considered showing up anyway, storming in, reclaiming my seat like some forgotten heir in a family drama, but that would have given them exactly what they wanted. The excuse to call me dramatic, difficult, disruptive. Instead, I stayed home. Opened the bottle of wine I'd been saving for the campaign launch, watched reruns of a show I didn't like. The brooch sat in its velvet box on my coffee table, like a ghost of a gesture that no longer mattered. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Because what I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that the real betrayal had already begun months earlier, beneath my feet. in the very halls I thought I ruled. It would take one overlooked name, one forgotten connection, to unravel everything I'd spent a decade building. And it all started with a man named Jake Wilson. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was this. I had just been erased from my own mother's birthday, not by accident, not because I was late, but because someone made it so. And that someone wore my last name. The thing about exclusion is that it doesn't always slam doors in your face. Sometimes, it just quietly closes them behind you and waits for you to notice you're on the outside. That phone call from my father wasn't the first time I'd been written out of the family script. It was just the first time they said it out loud. I didn't cry that night. I'd stopped crying over them years ago, but I did remember, vividly, bitterly, the other times I was cut out without warning. There was Christmas, 3 years ago. I showed up at the house at 5 p.m., gifts in hand, dressed up in a green coat I'd splurged on for the occasion, only to find they'd already eaten dinner. "We thought you weren't coming," Mom said, with that casual shrug that always somehow made it my fault. I'd confirmed twice, once by text, once on the family calendar. Last Thanksgiving, I brought a homemade chestnut stuffing, an old recipe from Grandma June, the kind that took hours. I left it in the fridge with a sticky note. Bake at 375, 25 minutes. At dinner, it was still in the fridge. No one mentioned it, but Melissa's prepackaged pumpkin pie was front and center, garnished with cinnamon sticks and praise. I remember sitting there, watching her slice it like she'd made it from scratch, and thinking, I don't belong here. I'm a guest in my own bloodline. Then there was Dad's retirement party last year. I'd been asked to prepare a toast. I spent days on it, careful, honest, respectful. When the printed program came out, my name was gone. No explanation. Melissa, however, got a 15-minute slideshow set to Coldplay, and an entire speech slot where she cried about how Dad had always been her hero. I stood in the back with a plastic cup of champagne, nodding like a stranger. It sounds petty when you list it out. These moments on their own could be brushed off. But stacked together year after year, it's not a coincidence. It's a message. A slow, consistent one. You're not really one of us. You're tolerated, not embraced. After the birthday uninvite, I decided to text my mother. Just one line. "Mom, Dad said I shouldn't come Saturday. Is everything okay?" She never responded. Not that day, not the next. Erin, my closest friend since college, called me the night after the dinner. She'd seen a picture on Melissa's Instagram. My family, all dressed up at the Charleston, smiles wide, champagne in hand, no caption, just a row of emojis and a perfectly filtered moment. I wasn't in it, of course, but that didn't surprise me. "They really went through with it?" Erin asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "They really did. I swear, Olivia, this is next-level gaslighting. You should have gone anyway." "To what? Make a scene? Give them what they already believe about me? Or show them who you really are," she shot back, "that you're not the villain in their fairy tale." I didn't answer, because part of me still wondered if showing up uninvited would have just proven their point. That I was the problem, that Melissa was the victim again, and yet some part of me couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the party, but the precision of it, the timing, the coordination. I hadn't spoken to Melissa in weeks. There hadn't been a fight, a text, not even a snide comment on Instagram. So where did this mysterious tension come from? I started digging through my memory. Every recent interaction, every minor exchange, I came up empty, which was exactly what made it suspicious. Melissa didn't need evidence to make me the problem. She never had. All she needed was a well-timed sigh, a carefully phrased concern, a fake tear at the right moment. She played weak the way other people played piano, practiced, confident, and always just enough off-key to sound sincere. What I didn't know then, but was starting to suspect, was that this time, it wasn't just about family drama. There was something deeper, something coordinated. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep me away from that dinner, and they weren't finished yet. Because while I was counting old slights, someone else was moving pieces in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Paranoia is a quiet thing, at first. It doesn't scream. It taps you lightly on the shoulder when the timing doesn't make sense, when silence feels engineered, when people smile just a second too long. The Monday after my mother's birthday dinner, I went back to work like nothing had happened. Because that's what you do when your personal life tries to bleed into your professional one. You cauterize the wound and keep moving. Meridian was buzzing. Our department had just secured the Peterson renewal, a major win. Everyone was upbeat, focused, including Jake Wilson. Jake had joined our team 6 months earlier as a mid-level strategist. I still remember the first interview. He walked in confident but not cocky, well-prepared, clear-eyed. He spoke with intention, but he listened better than he spoke. A rare trait in a room full of overachievers. I liked him. He was sharp, driven, and somehow avoided the ego that usually came with those things. I promoted him 2 weeks ago after he helped salvage the Stratton pitch on a tight deadline. It wasn't a favor, he earned it. We kept things professional. Always. He called me Ms. Bennett in meetings. I respected his space. We occasionally exchanged recommendations for Netflix series or vented about Boston traffic, but that was it. I didn't know much about his personal life, and I preferred it that way. But now, with everything that had happened, I started to look differently. I couldn't help it. I began noticing the way Jake's tone shifted any time I mentioned Melissa, how his eyes flickered just slightly, like something unsaid was standing between us. Once or twice, I caught him pulling his phone away from his desk when I walked by, like he didn't want me to see the screen. Still, I had no proof, and I wasn't about to spiral into conspiracy theories based on a hunch. Until Thursday. Every quarter, our department does an internal compliance check, basic admin housekeeping. Part of that includes reviewing emergency contact records for off-site travel. It's routine, mechanical. Until I open Jake's file. Name, Melissa Bennett, relationship, partner, address, South End, Boston. Phone, 617, text 666. I sat back in my chair, my hands cold. Melissa. My Melissa. No, I read it again. The name Bennett wasn't rare. But South End? The same neighborhood she moved into last year? I grabbed my phone and opened Instagram. Melissa and I follow each other, barely. She likes the occasional holiday post. I scroll through her page, one manicured photo after another, coffee shops, farmers market shots, gym selfies, brunch with the caption, Sundays with my love. No tags, no faces. Until I hit one from a New Year's Eve party last year. A crowd of friends, Melissa in the center, holding a champagne glass. And in the background, just behind her shoulder, is a man. Partial profile, clean cut, familiar jawline. Jake. I stared at the image for a long time, as if it might blink first. I wasn't crazy. She had been dating Jake for at least a year and a half, and neither of them had said a word. Not when he interviewed, not when I promoted him, not when I mentioned our last name in passing. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. Had he known who I was when he applied? Did she push him toward the company? Had I been some kind of target? I walked to the kitchen to clear my head, poured cold water, didn't drink it. The walls felt narrower than usual. Back at my desk, I clicked open his personnel file again. Slowly, deliberately. She listed herself as his emergency contact. That's not casual. That's not, we've been dating on and off. That's real, established, intimate. I opened our internal communication logs. Everything looked clean, professional, distant. But I couldn't ignore the pattern now. How had I missed it? Later that afternoon, Jake knocked lightly on my door to drop off a report. I looked up at him, smiling reflexively. He smiled back. Everything good? He asked. Yeah, I said evenly. Just processing numbers, nothing exciting. He nodded, turned left. He had no idea I knew. Or maybe he did. That's the problem with liars. Once you spot one, you start questioning everyone's eyes. I sat at my desk for another 10 minutes, staring at my monitor, but I wasn't seeing numbers anymore, just names, connections, timelines, intent. And one glaring question, sharp as glass. Why would Melissa want her boyfriend to work for me, without telling either of us? That wasn't just coincidence. That was coordination. That was strategy. And if she was capable of that, what else had she done? The funny thing about instinct is how often we dismiss it. We explain it away. We call it overthinking or paranoia or just a bad mood. But instincts don't lie. They whisper when logic won't listen. And that week, mine was screaming. 2 days after finding Melissa's name in Jake's file, I started paying closer attention. Not to what was being said, but to what wasn't. Small things. Jake had stopped coming to team lunches. He no longer joined optional brainstorms, especially the ones I led. And when I mentioned my upcoming campaign with Stratton, the same one he'd helped develop, He looked uncomfortable, not guilty, just restrained. Like he was holding something back and hoping I wouldn't notice. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed facts. That night, I called Erin. I know this sounds insane, I told her, pacing the length of my apartment, but what if Melissa knew exactly what she was doing? What if she sent Jake to my team on purpose? There was a pause on the line, followed by the unmistakable clink of wine against glass. You think she planted him at your company? I think she knew he was applying, and I think she didn't want me to know who he was. You're not crazy, Erin said calmly. You're finally connecting dots she worked very hard to scatter. I stopped pacing. But why? What would she gain? Control, leverage, access. She's always resented your success. Maybe this was her way in. I didn't say anything, because I knew Erin was right. Melissa didn't compete the normal way. She didn't raise her hand louder. She slipped her hand into the back pocket of someone else's success and made it look like hers. After I hung up, I went down the rabbit hole. I pulled up Melissa's old posts again. I paid closer attention this time, to dates, locations, captions, and suddenly, things started clicking. The new creative direction she'd launched for her online boutique last month? It bore an uncanny resemblance to our pitch deck for Stratton. Same color palette, same slogan rhythm, nearly identical layout. I opened her website and my campaign files side by side. It wasn't just similar, it was lifted. Stripped of the corporate polish, yes, but the bones were mine. The campaign I'd spent weeks refining with Jake and our design team. And now, it was dressed in florals and lifestyle buzzwords, living on her homepage. My chest felt tight, not with rage, but with clarity. She'd used him. Whether Jake knew or not, he was her funnel, her window into my world. She took ideas from our strategy meetings and repackaged them as inspired by. And then she accused me of causing tension in the family. I scrolled further back on her feed and stopped cold at a post from 2 months ago. A photo of her and Jake holding hands, backs turned to the camera, captioned, "Year 3 feels like home." 3 years. She'd been with him for 3 years. Jake started at Meridian 6 months ago. That meant for at least 2.5 years, he was Melissa's boyfriend. And never once had she told him who I really was. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and went straight into my meeting with HR, not to file a complaint, not yet, but to document the overlap, just in case. By lunch, I'd printed side-by-side examples of her boutique's branding against our Stratton visuals. I created a private folder. I labeled everything, dated it, logged internal conversations with timestamps. Then I called Erin again. If this was just family drama, I said, I'd walk away. I've done it before, but this isn't personal anymore. It's strategic. It's calculated. She didn't just try to shut me out. She tried to infiltrate my work. Erin's voice was low, measured. So what are you going to do? I looked at the sapphire dress still hanging in my closet, the one I'd bought for the birthday dinner, still unworn, still perfect. I'm going to show up, I said. To the family dinner, she asked. No, I corrected. To the war Melissa started without realizing I don't lose quietly. And just like that, the game was no longer silent. It was mine. I'd never crashed a party before, but there's a first time for everything, including reclaiming a seat at a table I was never invited to, but should have owned all along. Saturday night arrived with that sharp Boston chill that sneaks up after sunset. I parked 3 blocks away from the Charleston, not because I had to, but because I needed the walk. I needed the sound of my heels on pavement to remind myself who I was. I wasn't there to cause drama. I was there to watch the truth unravel, on its own. Inside the restaurant's tall windows, I saw them, my family, perfectly arranged like a magazine layout. My mother's burgundy dress, my father's signature navy blazer, and Melissa, effortless of course, in emerald silk, leaning in toward Jake like she owned him. I stood outside for a moment longer, heart steady, breath controlled. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a live performance. But for once, I wasn't sitting in the dark. I was about to walk straight onto their stage, with the script they didn't know I had. The maitre d' blinked as I approached. Good evening, do you have a reservation? I'm joining the Bennett party, I said calmly. He glanced down at his tablet. I don't see, it's fine, I'm family, I cut in, offering him the kind of smile that ends conversations. Without waiting for his response, I stepped past him and walked toward the table in the back corner like I had every right to be there, because I did. My father was the first to spot me. His confusion morphed into panic before he could hide it. "Olivia," he stood, voice low but tight. "What are you doing here?" "I decided to stop by," I said, placing the small velvet box, my mother's brooch, on the table. "Happy birthday, Mom." My mother's smile was the kind you give a waiter who brings the wrong order. Melissa blinked once, then leaned back with a smug tilt. And here I thought we'd have a peaceful night. Then Jake looked up. His expression was casual at first, polite. But then something shifted. Recognition. A tightening jaw. A slow inhale. "Wait," he said, standing. What's happening?" My father looked between us. "You two know each other?" Jake's voice came out slower this time. "Olivia's my boss." Silence. Absolute. Thick. Melissa turned to him like someone flipped her chair backward. "What?" Jake's eyes were on me now, full of dawning horror. "You're her sister." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. "You've worked at Meridian for how long?" he asked me. 5 years, I said. "And Melissa never mentioned you." I looked at her directly. "You never mentioned me either." Jake turned to Melissa, disbelief tightening every word. "You sent me the job listing. You told me to apply. You helped prep for the interview." Melissa's voice cracked, defensive. "So, that doesn't mean I knew she worked there." "You knew," he said. "You always knew." My father cleared his throat, attempting damage control. "Let's not—" "No," I interrupted. "Let's." I turned back to Jake. "Have you ever shared campaign ideas with Melissa?" His face paled. "I mean, not on purpose. I talk about work sometimes. She asks questions." "She always did," I said calmly, "especially when I was doing something worth taking." Melissa rolled her eyes. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. "Your boutique's last campaign mirrored our Stratton pitch, almost word for word." Jake froze. Melissa didn't. "It's called inspiration," she snapped. "Everyone borrows ideas." My father looked between us, clearly overwhelmed. "Melissa, is that true?" "Dad," she said sharply, "don't start." Jake stepped back from her then, like something inside him had fractured. "You used me." Her face contorted, rage mixed with desperation. "You don't understand. She always takes everything, attention, praise, respect." I didn't flinch. "I never took anything from you. I just didn't apologize for existing." Jake looked at her, then at me, and then at the brooch box still untouched on the table. "I need air," he said, and walked out. The silence he left behind was deafening, and for the first time Melissa had nothing to say. Jake's absence sat heavy at the table, like a pulled thread in a perfect tablecloth. Suddenly everything was unraveling. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. This wasn't about saving a relationship. It was about exposing a pattern. Melissa stared into her wineglass like she might drown in it. My father looked down at his napkin, pretending he wasn't there. My mother finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Is it true?" I didn't look at her. "Which part?" "The campaign," she said. "What you said about the Stratton pitch." I nodded once. "I have files, dates, drafts, internal logs, everything that proves she had access through Jake." Melissa set her glass down hard. "Don't act like I broke into your office. He told me about the campaign because we're together. He talks about work, like everyone does." "You encouraged him to take that job," I said, voice even. "You told him to apply at my company. You helped him prep. You coached him through the interview. So what if I did?" My father looked up finally. "Did you really never tell him Olivia was your sister?" Melissa scoffed, defensive. "We're barely close. Why would it come up?" "You live with him," I snapped. "For 3 years, he didn't know your sister's name was Olivia?" Her silence answered that for us. My mother's voice cracked. "Why, Melissa?" Melissa's expression shifted, defiance collapsing into something more raw. "Because I knew what would happen if he knew. He'd Google her. He'd find her name all over campaigns and Forbes features and interviews. He'd think I was less." "You didn't trust him to love you for you," I said. "So you lied." "I didn't lie," she barked. "I just didn't tell him." "Intentional omission," I said. "That's still manipulation." She looked straight at me then, eyes red but unyielding. "You've always had everything, Olivia." "No," I said, voice low. "I've earned everything." That landed like a slap. My father cleared his throat. This is getting out of hand. No, I said, louder now. This is the first time it's been in hand. We're finally talking about it. Out loud. Not behind my back. Not in whispered calls from Melissa, where she cries about how I make her feel small by existing. Melissa bristled. Because you do. I leaned forward. Melissa, I've spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller just so you wouldn't feel threatened. You were the adored one, the chosen one. I was the stable one, the reliable one, and you hated me for it. I hated how perfect you made me look like a joke, she said through gritted teeth. My mother started crying quietly. My father put a hand on her shoulder but said nothing. I didn't sabotage you, I said. I didn't write anonymous letters. I didn't withdraw anyone's college application. I didn't flirt with your boyfriends. You, however, did all of that. And more. Her face went pale. You withdrew my Harvard application, I said calmly. My father flinched. That's not what. You used my social security number, called the admissions office, said I'd accepted another offer. I was at debate nationals that week. You were the only one home. Melissa didn't deny it. My mother gasped. Melissa? She swallowed. You were going to leave. Everyone was so proud. I thought, if I delayed it, maybe they'd see me. My father stood now, voice hard. And Stratton, did you take those designs? Melissa's silence was the loudest answer of the night. I looked around at the people who called themselves family. My mother in tears, my father ashamed. My sister exposed but still clinging to the wreckage like it might float. I'm done, I said. I'm not here to be believed. I'm here to be clear. And with that, I stood and walked toward the door. Not broken, not vindictive, just finally free from the gaslight they'd kept burning all these years. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, not even because I was hurt. I couldn't sleep because everything finally made sense, and the realization was sharper than rage. Jake didn't come back into the restaurant. I left before dessert was served, though I doubt anyone touched the cake. Melissa didn't chase after me. She never does when the lie collapses. That's her pattern: cry, blame, vanish. Monday morning, I was back at Meridian by 7:45. The office was still quiet. I sat at my desk, turned on the overhead light, and pulled up the Stratton archives. Not the polished version, the raw drafts. The ones only my team had access to before the official rollout. There, buried in version 2.3, was a tagline we'd tested but never used. Built to reflect the life you dream quietly. Melissa had used that exact line in the banner of her boutique's homepage last month. I screenshot it, dated it, filed it. Then I walked down to legal. I didn't want drama, I wanted documentation. Our in-house counsel, Marcella, was concise and direct. I showed her the campaign slides, the time-stamped records, Melissa's website. She read through everything, asked 2 questions, then said, "This is proprietary infringement. We could absolutely pursue this." I nodded. "But I don't want it to escalate yet. I want it on file, quietly." She studied me for a moment. "You don't want her hurt." "No," I said. "I just want her stopped." That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with HR, not to file a formal complaint against Jake, but to disclose a potential conflict of interest. I told the truth. I hadn't known he was dating my sister. I hadn't known she was using him to gather information, and I had no evidence he was complicit. They appreciated my transparency, said they'd begin internal review. But the part that stuck with me? One of the VPs pulled me aside after and said, "For what it's worth, Olivia, your professionalism through this is exactly why people follow you." I thanked her, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Later that day, Jake knocked on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" I looked up, expression unreadable. "Sure, come in." He closed the door behind him and sat down, his shoulders tense like he was bracing for impact. "I didn't know," he said immediately. "About you, about her, I swear." "I believe you," I said. And I did. His reaction at the restaurant wasn't an act. It was confusion followed by betrayal. He'd been played just as thoroughly. "But I should have put it together," he continued. "She never wanted to talk about your company. She called you my sister, but never used your name. And any time I brought up a coworker, she changed the subject. You trusted her," I said. "I get it." He exhaled, relieved. "So, what happens now?" "I've documented everything. Legal's aware. HR too. You'll likely be moved to a different team." He nodded. That's fair. And Jake? Yeah? If she ever asked you to send her a file, even once, now's the time to tell me. He shook his head. Never sent her anything. But I did show her some slides once. Over dinner, casual. I didn't realize. You didn't have to. She did. He looked wrecked, not defensive, just stunned by the scale of it all. How do you survive this kind of thing? You don't survive it, I said. You see it, you name it, and you stop letting it define what happens next. That night, I walked past the Charleston again, not out of masochism. I just needed to see it in daylight. It looked smaller than I remembered. And Melissa? I hadn't heard a word from her since the dinner. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Which told me one thing clearly. The truth didn't destroy her. It exposed her. And now she had no script left to perform. And for the first time, I wasn't the one keeping quiet to protect the narrative. I was writing my own. I thought closure would feel louder, more final. But the truth is, sometimes freedom doesn't come with a bang. It comes with stillness. A quiet clarity that says, you're no longer chasing the version of yourself they refuse to see. A week after the dinner, HR finalized Jake's transfer to another department. Lateral move, no demotion. I signed the paperwork without hesitation, not out of anger, but because distance was necessary. For him, for me, for everyone. He stopped by my office on his last day under my supervision. No drama, no long speech. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, for how you handled all of it. You're a good strategist, I replied. That hasn't changed. He looked like he wanted to say more, apologize again, maybe. But instead, he offered a small nod and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No echoes. Melissa didn't reach out. But my parents did. A short email from my father. We owe you an apology. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I stared at it for a full minute before responding. Dinner, my terms. We met at a small French bistro in Back Bay. No tablecloths, no speeches, just eye contact and grilled salmon. They came humbled, not broken, but bruised in the way people get when a narrative they've clung to for decades finally collapses. My mother went first. We didn't see it, she said softly. We didn't want to. I didn't answer. I waited. She always seemed more fragile, my dad added. We thought she needed more support. She learned to weaponize that, I said. And you let her. They both nodded. We failed you, my mom said. We see that now. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no begging, just a slow, careful reckoning. And that made it real. When the check came, I paid. Not out of pride, but to draw the line clearly. That chapter was closed. And I wasn't asking them to carry any of it anymore. A few days later, I received a voicemail from Melissa. Short, flat. I know you hate me right now. I get it. I'm figuring some stuff out. I'm seeing someone, a therapist. I'm not expecting you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I didn't respond. Not yet. Some silences are earned. At work, things returned to normal faster than I expected. The Peterson campaign hit its numbers. The new intern didn't flinch when I gave her hard feedback. I started going to lunch again instead of eating at my desk. It wasn't a reinvention. It was a return to center. One evening, Erin and I sat on the rooftop of her apartment, nursing drinks and watching the city breathe below. You good? She asked. I'm lighter, I said. Not healed, but lighter. She raised her glass. To being done performing. I clinked mine against hers. To writing the damn script myself. That night, I walked home through streets I used to avoid, past the house where I'd grown up, past the corner bakery where Melissa once lied about me skipping school. The memories didn't sting, they just existed. Because that's the thing about family. Sometimes the blood ties aren't broken. They're untied, deliberately, carefully. So you can finally breathe without them choking you. And I was breathing finally, like I hadn't in years. 1 month after the fallout, I got an invitation, again, from my mother. This time, it wasn't engraved or embossed. Just a plain email with the subject line, "Dinner, just us." I agreed, not because I needed it, but because I finally didn't. The restaurant was small, Italian, not far from where she used to drop us off at ballet classes. The table was set for 4, my father, calmer now. Melissa, quiet, and me, not as a supporting character. Not as the scapegoat, just me, fully present. We ate slowly, talked in half-truths and full silences. Melissa didn't say much until dessert. Then, as the plates were being cleared, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small white box. I redesigned the boutique, she said. New name, new concept, all mine this time. I nodded. Good. I also credited the original inspiration from Stratton in my press release. That landed differently, not as a fix, but as ownership. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. Later, outside, she walked with me a block before saying, I'm still seeing the therapist. Good, I said. I know I ruined a lot. You did, she looked down. I don't know how to be your sister. You don't need to be anything, I said. You just need to stop pretending. We didn't hug, we didn't make promises. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the entire weight of our past alone. Back at work, things moved forward. Jake stayed, quiet, respectful. We nodded in meetings. That was enough. I didn't need closure from him. I already had it. One afternoon, our CEO passed me in the hallway and said, Glad you stayed steady. That's leadership. I smiled. Not for him, for me. Because this entire thing, Melissa, Jake, my parents, the lies, the theft, the silence, it didn't break me, it clarified me. And if you've listened this far, maybe it clarified something for you too. Maybe you've been cast as the problem in a family that refuses to look in the mirror. Maybe you've been the afterthought, the easy one, the one who doesn't need as much. Or maybe you've been gaslit so thoroughly, you started believing you were too much or not enough or both at the same time. Let me say this clearly. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from roles that were assigned to you without consent. Family is not a free pass for manipulation. Love does not erase accountability. And being related doesn't mean you owe anyone your peace. I didn't get a fairy tale ending. There were no perfect apologies, no magical reunions. But I got something better. I got my voice back. And if you're still holding your breath around the people who claim to love you, start exhaling. Speak the thing, name the hurt, burn the script. Because the moment you stop shrinking to make others comfortable is the moment you actually start living. Thanks for staying with me through this story. If any part of it made you feel seen, please like, comment, or share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if you've ever had to claw your way out of someone else's narrative, just know this, you're not alone. And you're not the villain. You're the one who walked through the fire and came out with the match in your own hand. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep the light on and don't be afraid to walk toward it.